Hello, how are y'all this afternoon? So we want to talk a little bit today about what we've experienced with our movement and journey toward getting to a hybrid cloud configuration. And it really starts a little bit with our story of how we got to where we are today in our data center. So we built a data center several years ago with the concept being that we needed to go forward with it. We needed it to be something that was innovative and something that wasn't just the same thing we did every time. And one of the challenges we had was, I'm not sure why this is, okay, there we go, sorry. One of the challenges that we had with it was you get the budget idea of, okay, it's gonna cost us $2 million to integrate and build a new data center with a traditional model where we're gonna put in a traditional filer and we're gonna have traditional maybe storage and compute all together. And there was a pretty significant amount of work that went into trying to decide what we were going to do with that. What we determined as we started to walk down the path was we could really do some really interesting and innovative things by looking with our folks and our friends at DataON at an HCI solution that leverages S2D. So as we walked down that path, we started to look at what our real requirements were. And what was really interesting was as we built out our model, we determined we could actually accomplish what we were trying to get done in a greenfield data center for about $500,000 compared to the $2 million original plan for investment. Then we turned around and said, well, that's interesting, but what about our remote sites? And we looked at that and said, hey, you know, we can actually extend out that same practice, that same procedure, how we build those different data center models and streamline them down to 2-node clusters at each individual site, allowing us the flexibility to really be able to scale up and scale out depending on whatever need we had. So we've had some really great experience with the folks at DataON in helping us provide those solutions. One of the things that's challenging, I think, for a lot of us is we're given a task to say, hey, build out a new data center and we need to put some stuff out there and we don't know if it's going to go in the cloud and we don't know where it's going to go. And how do you trailblaze a solution that is going to allow you to have that flexibility while at the same time be cost effective so that you're not putting all that investment in the front end and then they turn around and put something in the cloud and you've put all of this in a data center and aren't using that footprint. So we loved the capability of leveraging our DataON tools along with our Intel Optane storage to be able to really create an environment that allows us that ability to put what we need and what we want on there, as well as be flexible with what we move out into the cloud and what we can then pull back in if we determine we need to. So it really gives us that resilience. And as much as we loved the idea of the Azure Stack model when it was first being promoted, we realized we wanted a little bit more of our own hands-on approach to running that data center. And what we determined was by using DataON and by using the S2D and HCI configuration that we got with Windows Server 2016 initially, we realized that we could really do all of that and model our practice after what Microsoft is really doing with Azure. And that has really been a very interesting experience for us as we've moved forward. And what I'd like to do is give Paul here an opportunity to talk a little bit about kind of what his day-to-day has been like and what he's seen from a performance improvement standpoint.
Yeah, so a couple years ago, we moved away from our SAN storage. We went to the storage spaces direct, S2D. So we did a 6-node DataON cluster with Intel Optane for the caching, Intel SATA SSDs for the capacity, and 40 gig RDMA Ethernet. And when we did that, we had a huge performance increase. We had less than a millisecond average latency. Windows Admin Center will show you real-time latency, and it's always, except with really, really high I/O loads, is going to be staying less than a millisecond. SQL backups also greatly reduced, and the VDI logon times also very, very low, less than 30 seconds. We also have some remote offices that we started replacing our VMware hardware with 2-node clusters. And when we did that, we had NVMe SSDs with SATA and HDD or spinning hard disk for capacity. And what we learned from that present day is, if you can do it, try to do only SSD. Present day, it's become more cost effective to do only SSDs, and it's so much faster. And the rebuild time, do you want to the rebuild time of 8 terabyte spindle versus SSD? It's going to be substantially less with SSD. So I would encourage you, look and see how much does it cost for only SSD. We don't need to store a lot of space at our remote offices, so we can get away with lower capacity disk and not needing the spindle. So our new offices, actually we're doing only NVMe SSD. By doing only that, you don't even need to worry about the caching disk that you would typically want for S2D deployments. Just do only NVMe SSD. You only need 4 minimum for each node, and that would be really, really good for remote offices. What we also learned was, although S2D is scale out, so if you need to add more nodes, you can easily do that. But you have to ask yourself, how many nodes is too many? So Microsoft supports 16 nodes, but you also have to factor in redundancy. How many node redundancy do you have? How many physical disk redundancy do you have? So you may not want a 16 node S2D cluster because you can only tolerate 2 nodes failing. So for us, instead of trying to increase the nodes, what we'll do is create smaller clusters. So instead of doing, say, an 8 node cluster, you could do 2 4-node S2D clusters. So the advantage here is greater redundancy. If you want to have server A on one cluster, server B on the other, that's great. And that would be better than probably having them both. Let's say they're at a high availability pair. So do you want that on the same cluster, or one on one cluster, one on the other? So you have increased redundancy by doing that. And minimum, you need 4 nodes for using mirror accelerated parity, meaning you have mirror and parity. So you don't compromise speed by doing that. You don't compromise storage efficiency either. You can still use parity. So consider 2 clusters instead of 1. And then with 2 node deployments, you can use nested resiliency. This is specific to Windows Server 2019. So we have some Windows Server 2016 2-node deployments. You have two-way mirror, so you can sustain a node loss. If a disk fails in another node, you'll incur data loss. So with nested resiliency, you can still have fast speed if you do only SSD, but with nested resiliency, you can lose a node, you can lose a physical disk into the other node that's online, and the virtual disks are still online. Everything is still fine. All right, thank you.
So yeah, just real quick to tell you all, we have had just such an amazing experience with working with DataON and the folks at Intel and helping us produce a solution that we think has been cost effective and extremely elastic for us. So thank you guys for the opportunity.
Thank you guys.
So was it a slightly different design in one group deciding to forego network attached storage, and the other, I guess you guys were still using Isilon clusters? Is there some fundamental thing that drove that decision?
Yes, it was really a paradigm shift for us because we had traditionally had a very namely type of storage vendor that we would have separate with filers and filer heads and all that. And what we were discovering is we wouldn't know exactly what the size was going to be. We're a law firm, and at times we get lots and lots of data that comes in, and it's very difficult to figure out how to scale those solutions because you don't know when you're buying a filer that they're going to have a case that's going to spin up that you end up having to have a pretty substantial infrastructure for. And what we found with this solution is that we could be a lot more flexible as we needed to add the storage and compute in. So that was a big thing for us.
Yeah.
So I had like a great stories from both of you guys, like companies. What are the problems that you have faced, or like what are the hurdles that you have seen when you are migrating to this service or migrating to this architecture? Every architecture has a problems and also benefits, right?
Yeah, it does.
So what are the things that you want us to consider before architecting the solution?
One of the things that I think was important for us was picking the right vendor partnership. And I think that was a real struggle because we were diverging from a different hypervisor solution and trying to determine how we were going to move forward with leveraging Microsoft as our hypervisor. And that was very different for us. And we had to find that right choice, that right team member to help us. And that was DataON for us because it actually gave us the opportunity to work with a vendor that just has that seat at the table with the Microsoft team. So when we do run into issues, they're so Johnny on the spot to help us get it resolved and get it fixed. And so we can continue to migrate and move our workloads onto that environment and feel that confidence that we know as we move more and more production content out to it, we've got that partnership with them and with Microsoft to make sure it's stable.
And I'll say when Windows Server 2016 came out, Storage Spaces Direct wasn't perfect. They've made a lot of improvements, and I'm sure DataON, our hardware vendor, they're aware of any nuances and can definitely help you with your specific environment so you know what you need to do. And if you go with Windows Server 2019, you only have even more improvements, and you can't go wrong if you go with Server 2019 with S2D.